Okay, so this webinar is all about segmentation. First of all, understanding who are your buyers, how to get more information about them, and then what's the best way to slice and dice and segment your buyers so that the emails, the marketing touches that you're going to have actually hit home and they get engagement, they get results, they get reactions from the people you're messaging to. If you just send everyone at the same time, you get the same kind of result you'd expect. Some people think you're talking to them, some people think you're not talking to them, and the results do vary. So it's all about addressing your buyers. But do we actually know our buyers? Has anyone been around for this TV show? Has anyone seen this? Go ahead and throw it in the chat if you want. Be proud, represent, and if you have never seen it but you've heard of it, they've done a new remake of it. It's the Newlywed Game. Has anyone seen that? Has anyone been on that? You have not seen, so we've seen, have not seen that show, love this show, okay, seen it, awesome. Now, those that have said you've seen it, have you seen the original or did you see the remake? And for those of us thinking about this show, how this worked was there were these couples, and let's see, I will explain the show actually, and real quick. If you didn't see this, there were several couples, and they'd send one half of them away in a noise-proof booth, and they couldn't hear anything. And then they asked the other people that are still there, hey, if we asked your newlywed, your spouse, what your favorite food was, or what your favorite time of day was, or what you would best describe your mother-in-law as, what would they say? And they would write their responses, and then they bring everyone else back in, and those people that couldn't hear it, it was their job to try to guess what their spouse had said. And if you haven't seen it, you can imagine the kind of things that happened. People were completely wrong. Some people got cranky with each other. Like, what? I wouldn't say that. Lots of laughter, lots of mayhem. But what's crazy is these are people that are getting married, and they kind of barely know each other at the beginning of that. And then the reason I bring this up is, how well do we actually know our buyers? If married people, just newlyweds, can't quite understand each other, how well do we know our buyers if we haven't really gone out and tried to learn more about them? So that's what we're going to talk about here today, learning more about our buyers and then using that information to better segment inside of Pardot. All right, I'm your fabulous host today. Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. And I just got 3 quick numbers to introduce me to you by, so we can keep things rolling here. 9, which is actually now 10, a number of years I've worked with Pardot. 2,200 plus is the number of implementations that the team over here at Treasure has done, and 34 is the number of skydives that I've done. So what this all is just to tell you, and not so much to brag on the Pardot side, but just to share, all the things that we're going to talk about here today, these lessons learned, are things that I either learned the hard way, or our clients, our customers, and people we've helped have experienced. And so that's where all this collective knowledge comes from. Okay, today's show is sponsored by those old TV shows always had that sponsor. And so today's sponsor is the cereal we're going to call Total CSI. And if you haven't heard of the CSI, it's called the Cheshire Success Index. And what that is it's a roadmap for marketing automation. And what we found working with many, many, many people is that we're very good at teaching you how to build something. In fact, a lot of people are. You might see blog posts and content galore out there all about how to do something. But then the question is, okay, I know how to build 1 million emails. I know how to build drip campaigns. What should I build? Or who exactly should I email? What should I say? That strategy is missing. So this CSI has not only the features in Pardot that you should be using, but the strategies as well. And it's a 10-step roadmap. And I'm going to show you a picture of it over here. And a little mountain theme going on over here, but essentially what it is each step in the process is what you want to do in that order. So very first thing you want to do is get your segmentation figured out. And guess what? That's today's webinar. So you're in the right place. You can't go any earlier than this one. This is the core of everything. And if you find you're challenged by some of the later steps, then you actually want to come back and see, is there anything I can clear up in the segmentation world? Because when you do some work in segmentation and understanding your buyers, it all makes everything else easier. So CSI, the way we do that, it's a 10-question assessment. And so if you haven't done that yet, all you have to do is just say CSI or yeah, I'm interested, or shoot me an email. You can even put it in the chat. Say CSI in the chat. What we'll do is we'll reach out and we'll get you the questions. We'll get you scheduled to chat with someone about the questions. And what you get out of it is a number between 0 and 10 of how many features in Pardot you're using. So that's really what we want you to do. It's free. There's no cost to it. We just want you to know where you're at with marketing automation. Okay, yep, we see you in the chat. We'll take care of that. So what we do is we get you a number and you'll know, hey, maybe I'm a 3 out of 10. That's cool. Well, you'll know your very next step in the CSI might be ROI tracking. And then you'll also know what a 10 looks like, right? So when you do all these features in Pardot, now you're a 10. And that's where we want to get you. So that's my whole goal for doing a webinar like this. In fact, every month we do 2 of these webinars a month, and they're all on these topics here. So it all kind of lines up. We're trying to get you to a 10. That's our secret plan. Cool. Yep. I see another CSI. Awesome. We will get you those. And that's so much easier. You don't have to fill out a form. You just got to type 3 letters. Fantastic. All right, today's schedule. We're going to talk about the sources, how we get the information, and think about how much do we actually know about our buyers. And then the whole idea of a buyer profile. Has anyone done a buyer profile or buyer persona? Go ahead and throw that in the chat. If you've done a buyer, if you've either seen them or you've done them before, or you have personas or profiles, kind of throw what your experience level is in the chat with that, so I can customize this all to this. It's like a conversation, right? So, okay, I see, yes, we have one, but I've never seen it. Oh no. And what you'll find is there's usually a couple different personas. Okay, working on personas, nice. Definitely, Mo, okay, awesome. So we've got a little mix here, and we're gonna address this. But we're gonna talk about the difference between a profile and a persona. It's actually a wild difference, and I learned it live on the air in the podcast. And it was kind of a crazy moment. So we're gonna talk about that, and then we're talking about how to actually get more information about your buyers. And then kind of in the real world, okay, how do we address segmentation? How do we actually, okay, this is great, Casey. Oh, thanks for the strategy. How do I actually go from where I'm at now, maybe with one and never seen it, to where you want me to be? And I'm gonna talk about a logical plan to get you there. Sounds like fun. All right, let's get cranking. So go to the sources. I've got this at the end as well. There's even more podcasts, but one of the things you need to know is that I for sure was not an expert on this topic before I had some amazing conversations. Adele Ravella, if you don't know who she is, you need to check her out. Go on Amazon right now. Don't worry. You won't miss anything on the slide deck for just a second. And her book is actually called Buyer Persona, right? So she actually wrote the book on understanding your buyers better. Had a chance to interview Parmalee as well and Ellen on the podcast. And you can see their episode numbers right there. If you just type in Hardcore Marketing 50, or even Parmalee Eastman and Hardcore Marketing, you'll see those episodes pop up. You can listen to them or make a note to listen in the car or something like that. But what you'll find is I'm going to distill a lot of what I've learned from them. And Adele was amazing and so patient with me because she was actually the 3rd person I talked to on the podcast. And I really did not understand buyer personas when we first got started. And then from there, the win-loss expert and Parmalee and then Ellen, really understanding, okay, how do I get the information that I want to get? So that's, if you're looking for more information, Adele sort of is the foundation, and then Parmalee and Ellen talk about how to go and get that information, how to go interview your buyers, and that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, so let's get cranking on this newlywed game. How much do we know our buyers? So if I were to just ask you here in the chat, like how much do you know about your buyers? And is it gut information? Where did you get your information from? Could you learn more? Or where are you at with how much you know about your buyers? Go ahead and throw that in the chat and we can kind of talk about it. So a lot of times what you end up having, yeah, you could definitely learn more for sure. We could always learn more. Oftentimes we tend to have this gut knowledge. I know I was there. I had this gut knowledge that, I think that our buyer's like this. But what you might find out is that your buyer, that knowledge may just be your bias. You may just have a preference yourself for a certain kind of marketing. Or you may just prefer a certain method, like, I like emails coming this way. But are you your actual buyer? Even if your marketer is selling to marketers, you may not be your buyer because you may not be in that same situation that they're in. So it's really important to kind of check yourself before you wreck yourself. I don't know that quote. It's very important to check yourself and understand, okay, where did this information come from? And the buyer and the information about them is the most neglected part of this whole process. I love that. That is quote of the day. Ting. We need a prize for you, because that's we don't use the personas. We definitely use our biases. So true. But that's so honest, but it's so true. That's oftentimes what we do, right? We just, oh, well, I would prefer marketing this way. I mean, how many of you have seen the Super Bowl commercials and, you know, an ad goes by and you're like, that was a terrible commercial. Wow, those people just wasted $1 million. Well, they might have, or maybe you weren't the buyer. Maybe, and now our fingers crossed, we hope that we just weren't the buyer. But if you were the buyer, like it was, you know, it was geared for, you know, it's something that you would buy. You're like, I still don't like it. And it's like, oh no, maybe they did waste money, but you never know. It could be the biases in play, and you just want to hope that that company did a little more research on that big spend. And oh, you think, I love it, Justin. You think you know the answer that she gave to the question on the slide. What was the question? Go ahead and throw that in the chat. That's fantastic. Who would have thought? You've seen that episode. Fantastic. So we're going to keep moving, but this is also not your fault, right? We've all been there. And honestly, it might not be PG. Oh, fair enough. You can make the call. We can always Google it, I suppose. It's not necessarily your fault before this webinar that you don't necessarily know that much about your buyer, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And, you know, some of the biggest offenders, honestly, is HubSpot. They've got some great marketing, but I learned personas from them. And you've probably seen this model, not just from them, but from other people too, where you have this, what's actually called the buyer profile, but maybe is called a persona, but people are misusing their words, you know, and it has what, a photo of someone on it, and it tells you their background. I see on there, married with 2 children, 10 and 8, suburban, age 30 to 45, identifiers, right? How helpful is that? That's the question we're trying to answer. If you look, this is actually a profile. And if you look at Adele's quote, most of what passes for a buyer persona these days is actually a buyer profile. And I can't imagine how this drives her crazy, because it drives me crazy, and I didn't write a book on it, right? So actually what we're looking at here are profiles. And you see over there, the FBI, they have a profile on like a most wanted person. So just be very clear on, if you see this kind of thing, it has their background, their demographics, maybe some identifiers, how we caught them, why it was notorious, in a picture. And oftentimes there's like a fictitious name you're giving them. Now I get that it humanizes them, so it's not all bad, but it's not very actionable, because really the question is, so what, right? So you look at this kind of a document, if you're looking at a profile, you say, so what? And so this is one of the main reasons we don't do much with profiles and buyer research and marketing, is because when we see a profile like this come across and we're like, okay, why would I build that? But even if you do build it, how would I use that? I think it was Karsha, I think you said earlier, you know, have one, I've never seen it. Well, you've never seen it if it's not really that helpful. And so a lot of what Adele helped you see is that if you go and take the time to build a profile, it's not so actionable. What are you going to do about it? You're going to make a campaign around children? You could, but what's really actionable is the persona. And so, you know, some of the things, I kind of talked to this already, it's not all bad. It can inform some basic segmentation strategies. So if you know that a lot of your customers are in a particular industry, that's good to know. You could do some basic segmentation on that industry. You might also target them with Facebook ads based on some of those demographics. That could be helpful. In fact, I had a really interesting interview recently, and one of the people we were chatting with, they found out that most people bought houses and they sold houses, like pre-made houses. They found that most people that buy houses when they're younger, they have a dog, and the dog sort of motivated them to buy a house. So based on that knowledge, they went and did a big campaign all around dogs and buying new houses, right? And it actually has been their most successful campaign. So there are some positives to this. And lastly, it gets us thinking about the customer as a person. It's not a number, it has a name. So those are all good things. But when we really get down to it, what I want to drive us all to do is move on from profiles. In fact, don't even worry about creating profiles. Think about creating personas. And it's not going to necessarily be easy, but what you'll find is it's super powerful. And then when you do these things properly, it sets the stage for all the work you're going to do on all the other CSI steps. Buyer personas are actionable, and they reveal insights about decisions, about attitudes, which I would also say are feelings, concerns, criteria, the different things going on in the background of why they made certain decisions. And these are all things that drove a prospect to choose you, your competitor, or the status quo. And what's interesting is, if you ever lose a deal, more often than not, you didn't lose it to a competitor. You lost it to the status quo, because making no decision is actually a decision too. And there are a lot of concerns and emotions around that. And so we'll get into that a little bit, but here is an example of an actual persona. And you can see there's so much to it. I'm not going to read it to you. Of course, we've got some of the things at the top in terms of maybe their industry or their segment, the roles they play, their education. So we've got some of the baseline information. But more importantly, my responsibilities, how I'm evaluated, information, the resources that I trust. And these all come from, and we'll talk more about this, buyer interviews, where you say, okay, how did you research this and these solutions? And they tell you, okay, well, I talked to consultants, I went and looked at G2 Crowd, I went to the App Exchange, I went to a conference, and they're telling you how they make their decisions. And what's fascinating is, it's often said that, we're logical people making emotional decisions, but actually that's been changed around now. We're actually emotional creatures trying to do some thinking, trying to do some logic. But really the undercurrent is the emotion. And so personas are fascinating. And to do that, we need to build these things out, we need to map the journey. We need to actually have conversations with our buyers, and we need to talk to them. And so, first of all, surveys are not going to be it. Has anyone done a survey or sent out surveys? And what did they say, and what kind of information did you have in there? One of the challenges with surveys is that they don't have the chance to have a legitimate follow-up question, and at least one that is taking the context of the answer into question. So if I would ask, when you first went back, and this is the question to start with, tell me about, let's go all the way back to when you were first evaluating this sort of product or solution. What drove you to start in the first place? Or what sort of initiated the process, right? So go all the way back. And then they say, oh, well, I had just gotten this new job and it such and such happened. Your follow-up question to that, usually the follow-up questions, the answers to those is where most of the information for your buyer personas comes from, right? It's kind of frustrating, right? Because otherwise you could do it in surveys, but really it's the follow-up. You're like, oh, so what was happening when you first got that job? Oh, well, we were getting overrun by sales and they were cutting our budget and all these things were happening. So it's that follow-up question that you really want to be able to get to. And so the buyer interviews are the ones that are able to do that. And really, we need to chat with our buyers to get there. So when it comes to doing the buyer interview, has anyone done this, by the way? It can be kind of scary at first, but actually it's really important to do this. The buyer interview is so important. Not yet. Well, I highly encourage you to try that. And there's some information here, and if you're not sure and you're about to do it, you can always email me, say, I'm about to do this, and I'll wish you luck, and I'll send you a meme and maybe a couple of questions you can ask. Now, you can do it yourself, but it's important not to have someone connected to the buy that is doing it. So oftentimes this is done after a decision is made. So it could be a month or so after. You don't want to necessarily do more than a year. I like to not do more than 6 months after a purchase. Also, you can do 6 months after they didn't purchase, if they're willing to chat. And the win-loss book that we talked about earlier talks about the fact that it's important to talk to people that did choose you and also people that didn't choose you, and use information from both of them together. But don't include someone in that process that was there. Like, don't have the sales rep ask these questions. Oftentimes, not even the marketer that's doing the campaigns is asking the questions. In marketing, we can kind of just distinct ourselves from the process, so it might be okay, but just keep in mind your own biases. They actually have some great third parties that do this. Ellen does this. Parmalee, several of the people we mentioned, and we'll mention them again. You can actually hire them to call your customers for you. Very tempting, right? Because they're so good at this and people just want to talk to them. and they just want to share their experience. People just want to be heard. And so they'll do that. But if it is you doing it, consider recording it. And one tip I got recently that was fantastic is, do you mind if I record this so I don't have to clank on the keyboard? People usually, yeah, sure, no problem. Like, this is private. This is not, I'm not using this for marketing. This is just so I don't have to be furiously typing. And that way you can kind of get a transcript and really analyze the data. And then you start at the beginning. I mentioned this question already, but here it is again. Take me back to when you realized you needed a solution, or you needed a service, or when you realized you had a problem, right? And they might say, oh, well, this happened, or this happened, and this happened. And it's that follow-up question. At a very minimum, you can just say, tell me more. Tell me more about that. What made you do that? What made A made you B, right? Just, little follow-up question just to understand the layer underneath what they might be saying. And you'll be surprised. Just a little question like that, you get people talking. Adele did this live with me on her on the podcast interview with her, where she asked me about when I first decided to buy marketing automation. It was fantastic. And she asked me, okay, take me back. And I started describing what was going on. And you could tell she was actually, as I was talking, getting snippets out of, oh, this is important in the process. This is important in the process. So if you want to hear a buyer research call, just go listen to her podcast, because it's fantastic. She literally does it to me like a guinea pig. And now what she shared is she's all about the attitudes, concerns, and criteria people were thinking about. I added this slide extra because one of the big ahas I've had recently is that when you're mapping out this journey, this is the real point of doing these phone calls with your buyers. Persona, whatever you want to call it, what you actually want to do is map out what their journey looked like, right? Because we force a journey on them with our drip campaigns, but taking a step back and understanding the journey from their side, having a little empathy and understanding what did they do on their end, regardless of what we inflicted on them. There's really three things I want to pay attention to. And almost everyone I've talked to talked about the first two. And it wasn't until a recent podcast. It's not out yet. It will be soon. That was all about the empathy and the feelings of the marketing. So first of all, the actions taken. So what actions did you take? Did you do any research? Did you have any calls with sales? Did you look at any marketing? Did you attend any webinars? Those are the kind of questions you want to understand. And when did they do that? What kind of actions did they take on their end? If you did this alone, you'd be amazed, because they're doing a lot more actions than the clicks that we're usually picking up, right? We're often so focused on the clicks that we don't realize they're actually doing a lot of things on their end. Second, what are the questions they're asking? And not necessarily asking out loud, but they have in their head of like, okay, who should I pick? Or what is the problem? Or is it really a problem? Or can I get away with a cheap solution, right? Whatever the questions they're asking, you might recall these questions from our content webinar. These are the questions that fuel the future content and the future drip campaigns you're going to do. Finally, the feelings. There's a new Harvard Business piece that you should check out. It's all about the feelings involved in the buying process. It's really interesting. And there's a transition, and there's a whole list of them. But everything from like scared to safe, or sort of bored to excited, or growth. Sometimes people feel stagnant where they're at, and then buying your thing might help them feel like they're going to grow, or they maybe are worried about what they're doing and might make them feel safe. And there's these little pairs of questions, really interesting. So just pay attention. You can ask about the feelings. Sometimes they might just be expressed in the words that are being shared, but consider those feelings are like the actual logic of what's going on underneath all the actions and all the questions that they're asking. Okay, real quick, let's talk about getting it done at Pardot. Then we'll have some resources, and we'll do some Q&A. So segmentation plan. How do we plan? How do we chop the apple pie in half? The CSI requirement, and by saying that, every one of these CSI questions, we talked about at the very beginning, the different steps in the roadmap, each one has a question associated with it. And the question really helps you understand what needs to be true to get a full point on that roadmap step. And really, it all boils down, it's a longer question, but it all boils down to sending targeted emails. And you don't want to send to everyone at the same time. So you can accomplish that by at least sending to at least 2 different groups. So you're not blasting to everyone, blast to just 2 main groups. So I would say if you're in the process of right now where you send to everyone at once, just consider sending to at least 2 different groups, and they're your largest profiles, right? And notice I put profiles because, hey, you might know the largest demographic. It might be the 2 largest industries you have, might be client base versus partner marketing. It could be a mixture of any of those 2 things, but consider those. If you're already doing that, and by the way, let me know where you're at too, in the chat. So if you already have at least 2 or more, now is the time to start expanding. So you've got 2 or 3 of your largest profiles. You can start building nurtures for your largest ones, largest 2, 3, 4 profiles, right? You can build nurtures for them. And while you're doing that, it's then time to begin your persona research. So first of all, if you don't have any personas, no segmentation, you're sending to everyone all at once, you want to first divide up your total list at least into 2 or 3. Start building some nurture, start building some targeted emails for those 2 groups. And then while that's happening, because you're going to get a lot more engagement than you've ever had before doing that, if that's already true, or once that's the case, then you start doing those buyer persona research calls, because you're going to have the time, you're going to have the engagement starting to happen, and that's going to be very encouraging. But then what you'll find with the buyer persona research is it blows it out of the water. And one fascinating story was that, if you divide by your industries, and I don't know how many industries you all work with, but it could be many, right? It could be finance, it could be tech, it could be healthcare and life sciences, it could be manufacturing, education, right? Nonprofits, the list goes on, the list goes on. So if you just stuck with profiles, you're going to run into a problem, because you're going to have a lot more profiles than you probably have time to do marketing. And that may be even the case for you now. What you'll find with buyer personas is you often have far less of them than you have profiles. In one case, Adele shared with me on the podcast, John Deere, the tractor, large farm equipment people, brought her in to do some buyer persona research. And so she did a call with a lot of their buyers, the buyer persona research calls, all those kind of things. And they had a particular product line that was sold in 7 different geographies. The industry verticals are something like 5 or 6. So there's a lot, and they had different languages, different currencies, and all these different combinations, right? So if you did the math of like 7 times 5 times all the different languages, you probably got like 35 different possibilities. And that would be like 35 different nurture campaigns if you really had the time. No one really has the time for that. And you don't need to do that, because what she found out by doing her buyer persona research, any guesses how many personas they had in this one particular segment, where it was 7 times 5 times this times that. Any guesses? Just throw a number out in the chat. How many personas do you think they had? It was roughly 35 profiles they had. Any guesses how many personas Adele was able to identify after she did the pathway? 3, very good guess. I see 5 as a guess as well. Very close. You guys knew where I'm going with it. The answer was 2. They only had 2 buyer personas when it really came down to it. There was a more mature buyer who wanted to see a comparison chart, who did not want to talk to anyone, who'd bought these things before and knew what they were going to do with them, and they just wanted to compare. They wanted to see some specs. That was it, right? And they wanted to get the order form and get going. The other group never done this before. They were kind of pivoting. They were trying out a new marketplace. And despite the industry or any of these things, the way they like to buy, their journey that got mapped out was they really wanted to talk to someone. Comparison charts boggled their minds, and they needed to see examples of how people in their peer groups had used these equipment to make an impact on their business, right? And so it was what ended up being many different profiles was only 2 main buyer paths. And that was really powerful, because then they were able to use Pardot and marketing automation to dynamically change pictures, right? You can change pictures, you can change languages, you can drop in country, you can drop in industry into your email, no big deal. But the emails were written, or the marketing was written specifically for one buyer persona or the other. So that's really the magic of it. Real quick on Pardot lists, because this is kind of ties into it. So we're doing all the segmentation. Static lists, kind of super refresher. Those guys are like buckets. They sit there and you fill them up, and you have to manually fill them up. So you manually either add people when you upload a list, you write an automation rule that puts people in there, or you manually add someone into it, and that's how that goes. Dynamic lists are fun. And dynamic lists are the ones that automatically, based on criteria, you can see it over here on the bottom right, based on criteria, they add people to the list. What you may not know, or hopefully you do, either way you will now, they also can take people off of the list if you know information about them. So I love dynamic lists. Most of my lists are dynamic lists, unless like it's like a particular lead source, like I met 35 people at this event, or 1,000 people came from this lead source. I need to keep that intact. Yeah, I can still track it other ways too. It's obviously in the fields and whatnot, campaigns, but I still like to have some static lists I can go back to. Dynamic lists, though, are based on where people are at in the process, who people are, and what you'll find is most of your segmentation will be done with dynamic lists, because you want to dynamically put people on there as soon as you know if they fit the criteria. Segmentation rules, these don't get used very often. These are a snapshot in time. It's like, how many people want pizza right now? Okay, these people do. And then it never runs again. So I don't recommend using segmentation rules, even though it has the word in it. So don't use those. I had a quick question. We're just starting to use Pardot and preparing our first e-blast to a list of 300 known buyers of our products. Should we split this list and test subject lines and call to action? I would love you to split that list. Now, if that's your total number of people, 300, then yeah, I would recommend splitting it. If that's just a small drop in the bucket, like, well, normally you're setting to 10,000, and this is just like a little quick source, then maybe it's not worth the effort. But if these are like, if this is like a good list for you, then yeah, definitely consider splitting that. And the question back to you would be, how would you split that? What kind of criteria? You can use profile information to start with, right? If you just happen to know something about one group versus another group, something major that where you can talk to them in a different way, I would love you to split that up. The subject line testing, the call to action, those may or may not even change. Maybe the only thing changing is the language you use. So maybe the subject changes, and maybe the language and the call to action, it could be the same call to action. See, that's the thing, right? It could be you're sending them to the same, landing page, the same download page. You want them to take the same action. You're just talking to them in a different language. So for the John Deere case earlier, we would say, you know what you're doing. We're going to get out of your way. Don't worry, no one's going to call you. And here's that document you wanted, right? Now, in that case, maybe the call to action does change for the beginner buyer, where it's like, here, click this number, we'll talk. Let's talk now. So maybe they have a different call to action. But even if you didn't have separate content to offer different groups, you could still, for sure, at least change the language so they feel like you're talking specifically to them. And then check it out, test it out, see what kind of results you get between just blasting everyone and then starting to segment out. Great question. A couple quick tips. Campaigns. If you didn't catch the webinar on connected campaigns, it is the biggest thing in Pardot since sliced bread. I believe there's a recording of that. If we can, we'll throw that in the chat. But you definitely want to check out the connected campaigns, because it's Pardot campaigns, Salesforce campaigns. They're now connected. And it means you're going to get some crazy reporting, but there's a little work you have to do in advance. But when you do that, note now you can start using dynamic lists to say, if someone's a member of this Salesforce campaign, connected campaign, add them to a list. So you can start doing some really cool stuff with your dynamic list based on campaigns. Also, you can nest your lists. Consider doing this. This will make you super nerdy, geeky, amazing, powerful, all-efficient person, marketer, because you can actually have a list that includes lists, and it can have criteria that's different on each stage. So you can use that to make it more efficient. Okay, there's a link in there for the Connected Campaigns recording. So go check that out, get the recording. We'll do it again, or you can just listen to the recording. Either way, Connected Campaigns is huge, so make sure you check that out. Finally, I like to do my exclusion list, right? So there's suppression lists in Pardot. When you're sending an email, so Bruce or anyone else, if you're sending your email blast out, you want to have your suppression list of people you don't want to send to. Well, if you're doing it like a one-off email and things change a lot, you might want to use that suppression list. But what I like to do is, if I've established, okay, here's my, my A list, and then there's the B list, the two different segments that I'm going to email to, and I go ahead and I put the suppression list as a criteria inside of the dynamic list, right? So I'm essentially nesting lists, but I put my suppression list inside the main list so that it suppresses them from within there. That way I don't have to remember to make sure I add 1, 2, 3, and 4 lists to the suppression list, right? If you have a suppression list, put all of those together in one dynamic list, and then go ahead and add that one suppressed dynamic list to all of your other lists so that it kind of builds in the suppression automatically. That way it's not like, oh, I forgot to suppress it, and people we wanted to not receive the email did. It's already taken care of. And then you could always suppress them again, and no harm, no foul. But for sure, you kind of built your suppression into the process. All right, let's talk resources, Q&A, and then we'll get out of here and see what's up. So real quick, there's 2 podcasts. If you don't already know about them, real excited about the new one that came out called Pardot Life Hacks. Jennifer does that. She's got this fantastic, cool looking photo there with a Trailblazer outfit on. I totally need one of those too. But it's fantastic. So check out Pardot Life Hacks. She goes in depth on every single feature you can imagine. Several episodes now, just did a whole show on connected campaigns. Has done some talking on segmentation, just interviewed someone to talk about Salesforce admin and how that can tie into being a Pardot admin. So love it. Pardot Life Hacks, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you get your music from, you can get that podcast at. Huge. I learned from it as well. Fantastic. And then there's my podcast, which you probably heard of. If not, it's a hardcore marketing show. Cord spelled like corpse and not like the other way. And those are the numbers to write down. So Adele's number 3, Parmalee's number 50, Ellen's number 60. Susan is on our team, and she actually does workshops with people to help them sort out who their buyer personas are and who their buyer segmentation are, as well as the rest of the Cheshire team. So if you're working with us now, these are things we can help you out with. Just bring it up to your team. Like, I would love some help with segmentation. Boom, they're going to help you out with it. But these are numbers to write down. These are the shows that I highly recommend. They're all about this topic. Like, I am like all of you. I'm a marketer, and I learned from some of these experts here. And so go to the source. I highly recommend them. Wong, saw your question. We're right near the Q&A, so I'm just going to hold on to that for the Q&A, but I will definitely address that. Super secret for those of you here on this webinar. Super secret. I'm your biggest fan. I'm glad you're on this thing, and I'm glad we're all learning together here. I'm excited to tell you, just you all, it's not on social, not anywhere else, the book is coming out. So this is like a couple years in the making. Should be out this December, should be on Amazon by November, mid-November. So there's the cover. Finally got that back today. Actually, it's like all pressing. It's all getting out there. But all of this conversation around CSI, around strategy, it's all in this book. So I'm super stoked. If you'd like to see a preview of it, and I'm not putting this out on social or anything, if you'd like to see a preview of it, I've got a preview PDF I can send you. Shoot me an email. Say hi. And ask. And I love to send it to you. Get your thoughts on it and see what you think about it. And this is, again, we're not putting it anywhere else. So just for you, because you're here, love for you to check this thing out. Finally, hey, Team Chesh, don't be a stranger. We're here to help. So it could be, hey, teach me more of this, show me this so I can do it myself, or I am super busy, just take care of it. We do all 3 of those things, sometimes all of them, sometimes just 1 or 2 for a lot of different groups, and we love doing it. So we're happy to help. We also have some templates and some Excel charts that actually are like pre-made to help you set some of these things up. Especially in terms of like mapping out your lists and figuring out your suppression and how they all nest together. We can help you sort of put clarity to that. So happy to help. Glad you're here. Finally, peace of mind. Shoot me an email. If you're working with someone in the Team Chat, just shoot them an email. Hey, can you take a look at this list logic? I'm about to send this email out. Is this going to suppress who I think it's going to suppress, right? You make sure, a little peace of mind. We're happy to help. We just want you to be successful. Get those campaigns out. Get lots of engagement from them, and then a lot of customers, and be able to track that and show sales and show everyone else. Look what we've done here in marketing. All right, now it is time for Q&A. Thank you all for joining. I will stop the recording and we'll get to those questions.